The night was still. The stars were scattered like grains of salt upon the dark velvet of the sky. A soft breeze curled around the hills. Sheep huddled together on the rocky slopes, their breaths misting in the cool air. It was the kind of night where every sound seemed to pause, as if the world were holding its breath. This was Bethlehem, a small hilltop town in the rugged heart of Judea. Two weary travelers were making their way toward it. They came from the north, from Nazareth. The woman, Mary, was heavy with child. The man, Joseph, walked steadily beside her, leading a small donkey. They were coming because the Roman emperor had commanded it. Caesar Augustus had ordered a census. Everyone had to return to their ancestral town to be counted. And for Joseph, Bethlehem was that town, the city of David, the place of his ancestors. Most people know what comes next, the story of the birth of Jesus. But tonight, let us walk slowly. Let us step softly through time. Let us see Bethlehem as it truly was. On that quiet night, long ago, Bethlehem was small, tiny even by ancient standards. A cluster of limestone houses crowding the ridge of a low hill. Maybe 300, perhaps 500 people lived there. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and everyone was related somehow. The town's name meant House of Bread, and the hills around it were good for grain. Wheat and barley swayed here in the warmer months. Olive trees clung to the terraces. Shepherds roamed the rocky pastures beyond the town. Goats, sheep, and a few scrawny donkeys were common sights. The houses were made of stone, local chalky limestone cut from the hillsides, flat roofs, small wooden doors, thick walls to keep out the summer heat and the winter cold. They often shared walls with neighbors to save space and warmth. Most homes had only one main room. Animals might be brought inside at night for safety and warmth. People slept on raised platforms along the walls. There were low clay ovens, oil lamps, and rough-hewn wooden furniture. There were no streets in the modern sense, just winding footpaths between the houses, and steps carved into the rock leading down to cisterns and caves. Because Bethlehem was built on a ridge, its homes seemed to cling to the slope like barnacles. At night, the whole town glimmered faintly, the glow of oil lamps through cracks and doorways. And above it all, the stars blazed brilliantly in the dry Judean sky. Bethlehem lay within the Roman Empire. In those days, the empire stretched from Britain to Egypt, and Judea was a small but tense province on its edge. Rome had conquered the region decades earlier. They ruled through client kings and governors. Taxes were heavy. Roman soldiers enforced order, sometimes harshly, and resentment simmered among the local people. Judea was a land of deep faith. The Jewish people believed they were chosen by God. They followed the Torah. They prayed in synagogues. They journeyed to the great temple in Jerusalem, only a few miles north. But many also longed for liberation. They hoped for a Messiah, an anointed king who would free them from foreign rule. It was into this fragile world, this mix of hope and oppression, that Jesus was about to be born. The census ordered by Caesar Augustus was part of Rome's control. It allowed them to count the population, to tax them more efficiently, and to register their lands. Everyone had to travel to the town of their ancestors. For Joseph, that meant Bethlehem. And so he and Mary set out, a journey of nearly 90 miles, from the hills of Galilee, through the Jordan Valley, and up the steep ascent toward Jerusalem and Bethlehem. It would have taken several days on foot. Mary, heavily pregnant, likely rode the donkey. The roads were dusty. Bandits sometimes lurked in the hills, but they pressed on because they had no choice. By the time they reached Bethlehem, the town was crowded to bursting. So many families had returned for the census. Every home was full, every guest room taken. Travelers slept on rooftops and courtyards. The Gospels tell us that there was no room at the inn. But the word used, kataluma, probably meant a guest room in a family home. It is likely Joseph and Mary sought shelter with Joseph's relatives, but the guest space was already occupied, so they were given a lower room, a space where animals were kept, a cave or a stable carved into the hillside beneath the house. It would have been dim, earthy, and warm from the animals' breath. There would be straw scattered on the ground, the smell of hay, the soft sounds of animals shifting in the dark. There, in that humble place, Mary went into labor. The night outside was quiet. The town slept, and in the stillness, the child was born. Mary wrapped him in strips of cloth. She laid him gently in a manger, a feeding trough lined with clean straw. It was a simple birth. No midwives are mentioned, no fanfare, just a mother, a father, and a newborn, resting under the low stone roof of a stable. Outside the town, shepherds were watching their flocks by night. Shepherding was hard and lonely work. They slept under the open sky. They kept watch for wolves and thieves. They lived at the edges of society, often regarded as unclean or rough. But that night, the quiet hills stirred. The Gospel of Luke says a shining angel appeared to them, and the dark fields blazed with light. "Do not be afraid," the angel said. "I bring you good news. Today in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you." Then the sky was filled with a multitude of angels singing of peace on earth. And when the light faded, the shepherds rose in awe. They left their flocks. They hurried down the rocky paths into Bethlehem. They found the stable. They found the child, just as the angel had said. They knelt, they whispered, and then they went out and told everyone they met. The first to hear the news were the lowly, the outcasts, the ones the world ignored. Meanwhile, far away to the east, wise men watched the sky. They saw a star, a strange and brilliant sign. They believed it marked the birth of a king, and so they began their long journey west, across deserts, over mountains, toward Judea. They came months later, perhaps even years. By then, Mary and Joseph were living in a house. The child was no longer a newborn, but on that first night in Bethlehem, the Magi were still far away. The world was going on as usual. Caravans trundled along the trade routes. Roman soldiers marched on patrol. Merchants haggled in the markets of Jerusalem. Bethlehem itself likely went to sleep unaware. The villagers closed their shutters. They banged their hearths. They settled onto their mats in the warm darkness. And in a lower room of a crowded house, under the quiet stars, a child slept in a manger. To understand that night, we must imagine the rhythms of life in Bethlehem. People rose at dawn. They ground grain on stone querns to make flatbread. They fetched water from cisterns or the town well. They milked goats, gathered eggs, tended gardens. Children played in the dusty lanes. Boys learned their father's trades: carpentry, stoneworking, farming. Girls helped their mothers, spinning wool, kneading dough, fetching firewood. At midday, the sun blazed white. People rested in the shade of olive trees. And as evening came, families gathered on their flat roofs to talk and eat. They ate lentils, olives, figs, cheese, honey. They drank water, milk, and sometimes diluted wine. Meat was rare, save for festivals. Bread was the heart of every meal. They spoke Aramaic in daily life. Some knew Hebrew from the scriptures. Greek was used in trade, Latin by Roman officials. They were simple people, faithful, rooted in the land. Their lives were shaped by the seasons, by the cycles of planting and harvest, by the rhythm of Sabbath days and pilgrim feasts. Bethlehem was small, but it carried ancient echoes. It was the birthplace of King David, the shepherd boy who became Israel's greatest king. The prophet Micah had once written, "But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, though you are small among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who will be ruler over Israel." For centuries, people had read that prophecy. They had wondered, could the Messiah truly come from this tiny town? So when Jesus was born here, it was not just a birth. It was the fulfillment of a long-cherished hope. The town of bread had become the cradle of the bread of life. The night deepened. The lamps went out. Silence wrapped the hills. In the stable cave, Mary dozed, exhausted but content. Joseph kept watch, quiet and protective. The child lay sleeping, his tiny breaths soft in the dark. No crowds came, no trumpets sounded. Only the quiet crunch of sheep hooves outside and the slow flicker of an oil lamp. And yet, in that stillness, something vast had shifted. Hope had taken its first breath. Light had entered the darkness. And the world, though it did not yet know, would never be the same. Today, people imagine Bethlehem in glowing colors. Paintings show halos and golden straw. Carols sing of peace and wonder. But the real Bethlehem was earthy, dusty, humble, small. And perhaps that is the wonder of it, that the story of Jesus' birth is not one of palaces, but of poverty, not of royalty, but of simplicity. The Creator of the stars came to dwell under a low stone roof. The Lord of heaven lay down in the straw. Bethlehem that night was as ordinary as in any village. And that, perhaps, is the point. The extraordinary, hidden inside the ordinary. Light quietly dawning in the most unexpected place. And so the night passed. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. Dawn came, soft and pale over the Judean hills. Bethlehem stirred awake. Women stepped into the courtyards to draw water. Men led their donkeys to the fields. Children rubbed their eyes and reached for bread. And somewhere in that little town, a young mother cradled her newborn son. The world outside was unchanged. But for those who knew, everything had changed. Bethlehem returned to its quiet life. But it was no longer just a village. It was a beginning, a seed, a spark of light. The night of Jesus' birth was simple, humble, and filled with quiet wonder. And if you listen closely, you can still almost hear it, the faint crackle of a lamp, the whisper of wind through the hills, the soft sigh of a newborn child sleeping in the house of bread. Any village, and that, perhaps, is the point. The extraordinary, hidden inside the ordinary. Light quietly dawning in the most unexpected place. And so the night passed. The stars wheeled slowly overhead. Dawn came, soft and pale over the Judean hills. Bethlehem stirred awake. Women stepped into the courtyards to draw water. Men led their donkeys to the fields. Children rubbed their eyes and reached for bread. And somewhere in that little town, a young mother cradled her newborn son. The world outside was unchanged. But for those who knew, everything had changed. Bethlehem returned to its quiet life. But it was no longer just a village. It was a beginning, a seed, a spark of light. The night of Jesus' birth was simple, humble, and filled with quiet wonder. And if you listen closely, you can still almost hear it. The faint crackle of a lamp, the whisper of wind through the hills, the soft sigh of a newborn child sleeping in the house of bread.